Blog Talk Radio.
I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are back again today looking at the book called The Might of the Thoughts, Macht der Gedanken in the German. It's one of the 39 books written by Edward Albert Meyer, a one-armed farmer from Switzerland who resides in a tiny mountain village about 52 minutes east of Zurich, traveling by car. Edward Albert Meyer has had extraterrestrial contact since the age of about 5 years old, when a man named Svath landed a silvery pear-shaped craft in an area near Bulak, Switzerland, brought Billy into a ship, and started an 11-year mentoring process where Edward Albert Meyer learned many things, many deep and profound teachings. The teachings, in a generic sense, are called the teachings of the Spirit, and really are probably the basis for most of the religions here on Earth. But over time, the religions on Earth have become distorted and twisted in many ways, and now we are left with a lot of confusion. And one of the purposes of this show is to clear up confusion and to help you learn the might of your own thoughts. Since ancient times, the saying has prevailed, those who make efforts regarding a matter actually will also harvest results. And the human being must make the effort to clarify his thoughts, which then become more valuable, purposive, and productive. And remember, our consciousness is like a garden, so we need to occasionally weed our garden and remove those wildly growing negative thoughts, which can cause not only confusion but destruction to the psyche. Remember, the psyche is part of our material consciousness. The psyche controls the thoughts and the feelings associated to the material consciousness, but the human being has a spiritual consciousness, and we have an area in our spiritual consciousness called the Gemut, which is the controlling factor that controls the thoughts and the feelings of our spiritual consciousness. So we actually have an innermost self, which is our spiritual consciousness, which is always in connection with the universal consciousness, which only has neutral positive thoughts. However, our material consciousness needs clarification. And to clarify means to make a statement or a situation less confused and more clearly comprehensible. The word confusion means a lack of understanding, uncertainty. Confusion comes from a Latin word, which means to pour together, to mingle together. So if you had a cup of coffee and a cup of tea, and you poured them together into a second glass or a third glass, you would have a state of confusion in a sense, because there would be no distinction, no boundary between the tea and the coffee. They become mixed together. So one of the important things to do when clarifying your thoughts is to make clear distinctions and boundaries, and then your thoughts can become more purposive, meaning they'll be acting with a purpose, with an intention, with a design. And for me, clarification of my thoughts occur when I go over and over things again and again. As you know, I do repeat. Now, the German word here is Klärung, which means clarification. So we should practice clarifying our thoughts. When a human starts a garden, he's The garden is started with the intention of forming plants or having plants grow in this piece of land which is cultivated. Now that piece of land may be neglected or it may be well tended. And the important thing is to maintain your garden, nurture the neutral positive thoughts. Remember, not wildly positive either. Wildly positive thoughts are unrealistic and cause just as much damage or nearly as much damage as those wildly growing negative thoughts, which are analogous to weeds in your garden. So your thoughts take on a kind of a life of their own. They're a lot like plants. So if you let negative thoughts run wild, they'll form like a groove in your consciousness. And you'll keep falling into that rut, that groove over and over again. And you'll have wildly repeating negative thoughts. You'll be in a trap, a self-created psychic trap where your thoughts become narrowed into this one little frame of reference. And really what we want to build is actually a kind of optimism. Because if you're neutral positive, you'll be an optimist. You won't be a ridiculous optimist, but you'll be an optimist. You'll think that things will come to a good end. So you should cultivate optimistic thoughts. You should nurture optimistic thoughts. Nurturing means to cherish. But the reason that psychically disturbed human beings always see black and negativity is because their perceptive ability becomes limited and their world of thoughts falls prey to a kind of limitation where they can only operate in this narrow framework. So in this narrow framework, this cycle of negative thoughts appears over and over again, and we all have that battle to fight. I'm no different. But once such a rotation of thoughts has begun to operate, you have to free yourself from it. That's challenging. It's difficult. Now, what we need to do is broaden our field of perception. Only too quickly it can happen that the capacity for perception becomes impaired. Our capacity for perception is impaired by negative and wrong thoughts. And we can become delusional. And sometimes even geniuses, when their thoughts break down into these negative thoughts, they can become insane. Consequently, the human being is not supposed to be shaken and knocked about by the circumstances of their life. As long as you think that you are helpless and you will be knocked about by the circumstances, conditions, and influences of your life. A circumstance is an existing condition, a state of affairs surrounding and affecting someone. Your conditions of your life include your state of being, your state of health, your social position, your financial position. And in Might of Thoughts, in page 28, it says, he/she actually becomes the Lord and Master of him/herself in his entire life. Every human being who practices self-cognition and takes up self-examination and lets appropriate self-control grow learns this fact. That which the human being thinks he makes real. Good and positive thoughts must be tended and nurtured. And you should have a good and positive opinion of yourself. Now, the author of this book is very unusual in many ways. He's a very old spirit form, according to Meyer information. They refer to his spirit form as Nocodamian, and they say he's the seventh of 6 prophets. The 6 other prophets today are called Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Emmanuel. They all had, well, most of those prophets were known by different names in the past, and maybe we'll digress into that a little bit. But this spirit form is very ancient. and it's had this recurring job, particularly on Earth, of teaching these principles. And one of the main principles in the book, Macht der Gedanken, or the might of the thoughts, is learning to nurture neutral positive thoughts. Nurture means to feed and protect. Nurture can also mean to support and encourage during a period of training, of development. It means to bring up, to train, to educate. And the noun nurture is the act or process of promoting development, almost like a child. You can think of your thoughts almost like a child, because your thoughts, if you have powerful enough thoughts, your thoughts can outlive your physical body. And the perfect example of that are all the thoughts of all the great geniuses like Tesla and Einstein. Their thoughts still people study today. So one of the words that came up for the concept of nurturing was the German word to cherish. And to cherish means to hold something very dear. You should hold your positive thinking very dear. Your positive thinking tends to be very clear. And remember, thoughts can flow to feelings, feelings can flow to habits, habits can lead to circumstances. So good positive, neutral positive thoughts lead to good feelings as opposed to bad feelings. If you start having bad feelings out of the blue, check to see that you didn't have some bad thoughts that started those bad feelings. And if they keep rolling, those bad feelings will turn into bad habits. One of the bad habits is the repetition of these negative, wildly growing thoughts. But these negative feelings and negative thoughts can lead to addictions, all kinds of addictions in this world: drugs, alcohol, sex, video games, television, overeating, you name it. If a human being becomes a criminal, a felon, a miser, depraved, virtueless, jealous, vengeful, or a hater, and so forth, then he or she has already maintained the corresponding thoughts in his or her consciousness for a long time. Learn to be aware of what you're thinking. We also have unconscious thoughts, and be very aware of those. Those will just, you won't be conscious of them. You may have suddenly powerful emotions come up, and sometimes those are from unconscious thoughts. And emotions are different than feelings. Feelings tend to grow slowly out of the thoughts, and where emotions are reflexive and they happen automatically, and they can be very powerful and very dangerous. The thinking can be imprisoned by addictions, for example. Thinking can come about where they rotate in an everlasting circle that has no end. And I talk a little bit about addiction before. And it's probably a big problem today. Addiction is a chronic brain disease that causes compulsive substances to be used compulsively despite harmful consequences. And addiction can destroy marriages and finances and careers, health. And what happens is addiction becomes characterized by a compulsive engagement in a rewarding stimuli. A rewarding stimuli may mean the feeling you get from drugs or from nicotine or from sex or whatever you're addicted to. There are something called reward pathways in the brains. It's part of what's called the mesolimbic dopamine system. And even overeating food is sometimes caused by these reward pathways. We're getting a positive message from our brain by doing something which may or may not be so positive. Now, the rule is that human beings generally don't think consciously. We think very unconsciously, unfortunately. And consequently, the human being is almost always the unconscious cause of the circumstances in his life. The unconscious mind is something that I'd like to study in a little more detail. Again, the human being has a spiritual consciousness and a material consciousness. We have a conscious mind, a subconscious mind, and an unconscious mind. It's really interesting. The subconscious mind has the wisdom of your predecessor personalities in it. And the wisdom of those predecessor personalities provide a kind of inspiration during your life. But there are also thoughts and perceptions that occur in the unconscious mind. And our unconscious mind can actually cause circumstances in our life. And empirical evidence suggests that the unconscious can have repressed feelings in it, automatic skills. You can have some good things in your unconscious. Subliminal perceptions, thoughts, habits, automatic reaction, phobias, and desires are stored in the subconscious or the unconscious. Might of Thoughts, page 44 says, and furthermore, it is a fact that while the human beings want the good and the positive, he or she constantly prevents the achievement of the good and the positive because through wrongly steered thoughts, the human beings maintain wishes, hopes, and yearnings which in no wise agree with the good and the positive, and therefore do not harmonize with them. So we have to be very, very careful about what thoughts we have, what hopes, what yearnings. The yearning is a feeling of an intense longing for something. We have to be constantly looking at our own thoughts and evaluating them. There is a certain level of things that happen in our brain that are unconscious, and I think that's a big challenge. We have to be very aware that we're steering our thoughts. Don't let your thoughts go out on the ocean, so to speak. Don't drift on the ocean in the boat of your thoughts. What we want to have we want to steer our thoughts, and don't be just blowing on the wind of our thoughts mindlessly, because we can drift into trouble, and that often happens in people's lives. They drift into trouble before they realize it, and we get troubles when the unconscious mind starts guiding us. We should be consciously guiding our thoughts. Let me play a clip on the unconscious mind real quick, and we'll get back to our discussion. Sometimes these clips are a little slow in starting, particularly when I'm bringing up Windows Media Player for the first time of the day, specifically. But the might of the thoughts is such an important thing. We need to learn to control our thoughts, cultivate our thoughts, nurture the good thoughts. Here we go.
Apollo Robbins and other magicians help scientists understand how our brain perceives the world. At the Barrow Institute in Phoenix, even the slightest eye movements are captured with these eye trackers. This helps researchers understand why tricks with curved movements work better than straight movements. With curves, the eye automatically follows the hand. With straight line movements, it jumps to the end, which helps uncover the trick. Susanna Martinez-Conde and Stephen Macknick have studied dozens of magic tricks. The married research couple says illusions are the rule in our heads, not the exception. Magic Tony from Phoenix is a part-time magician, but also a postgraduate in psychology. That's why he sometimes performs in the lab. Test persons follow his tricks with up to 1,000 eye movements a second, and yet they still don't notice how they're being cheated. Tony purposely diverts their attention. We apparently can't help but follow other people's gazes.
So magicians may use explosions or things like that in order to cause distractions at times, but for the most part they use very specific tools in order to control exactly where someone will be paying attention so that they can do something somewhere else.
Even if our eyes happen to graze the hidden movement, we look, but we don't see the trick. Because our brain suppresses everything that's not in the spotlight of our attention. And in the shadows of the supposedly irrelevant, Tony moves the coin with a magnet under the table.
So, in the areas that we are not aware of, sometimes the most important things take place. Particularly when it comes to our thinking. We're not always aware of our thinking, and that's why emotions can erupt before we've realized what has happened. But our thoughts can be controlled and maintained along the right paths so that at least we can maintain inner freedom and harmony. And the universal consciousness wants to come into harmonious concord with all people, with all plants, with all animals in the entire universe. In fact, the incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. And creation radiates love, even though, in the human sense, it has no personality. The creation functions towards evolution. And our spirit form was created as a tiny piece of the universal consciousness. And the spirit form only responds to neutral positive thoughts. So all this book is about is harmonizing the material consciousness with the spiritual consciousness. And so evidently when we do that, it has a way of improving the circumstances of our life. And Billy talks about self-control in 1988 in an interview he had. He said, the self-control one possesses must be self-evident and can only be gained through an arduous self-scrutiny where every iota of one's thoughts is kept completely safe and under control, regardless of outside influences. One must not allow even the minutest negative vibration of thought and emotion to radiate or to become noticeable to others in any way. Now, our thoughts are very contagious. So if you have negative thoughts, they can radiate outward to others, and who then could have their own negative thoughts. That's why crowds can become violent at times. Arduous means requiring great exertion, and there's a certain level of exertion that's caused or happens when we work to control our thoughts. And we have to make sure they're neutral positive. If we don't have neutral positive thoughts, then we can become a psychically disturbed human being that sees black all the time. And our perception becomes very narrow, and those thoughts, those negative thoughts appear again and again, and a rotation of the thoughts occurs. And it's very difficult to free yourself from that. But we need to be able to do that. Or we can fall into what's called Gewalt in the German. And Gewalt is more intense than violence. Gewalt is very dangerous. Again, the difference between a feeling and an emotion is that these emotions, they come like lightning. They're surging, exciting, uncontrollable. And they're often only for a short duration, but the feelings manifest slowly and are associated with a preceding thought process. Typically, emotions are not preceded by any thoughts, and the conscious or the unconscious mind is responsible for the creation of feelings. Now, if you continue to study the Meyer material, you'll probably have a change in your feelings. I think you will tend to become more stable. Semyase said this to Billy. Semyase was Billy's third contact. She said that love and wisdom go together, and that the creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. Now, the love that creation radiates is an effective love, not a affective love, not a love that's based on romance and often leads to rage. An effective love is a constant love, a wisdom-conditioned love, a peaceful love that's an awareness of our connectivity to all things. And our health and our thoughts go hand in hand. And our consciousness determines our own health. And the more intelligent and rational we can become, the more our thoughts will have might. You see, the purpose of our life is to gather wisdom. And wisdom is a kind of knowledge that produces energy. And we produce energy, it helps the whole creation to evolve. And that's why you were created. You were given a spirit form to go through many material lifetimes to gather wisdom. Your spirit, your spiritual consciousness does not die. When your physical body dies, the spirit form leaves, as well as your material consciousness leaves your body. And they go into separate areas in the spiritual realm. Your material consciousness goes into what's called the overall consciousness block. And something called the overall consciousness block processes all the experiences that you've had and the knowledge that you've had during your material lifetime, and those experiences that can be converted into evolutive values like love and patience and kindness will be converted into a neutral positive form and stored then in the spirit form. Neutral, positive, equalized, healthy, and happy thoughts also build up a resistance for your immune system. Where anxiety and fear kill thousands of human beings, and anxious thoughts have a demoralizing effect. Wrong thoughts shake your entire nervous system. Neutral, positive, equalized, healthy, and happy thoughts build up your resistance. So your thoughts should be constructive. And if you have constructive thoughts, healthy thoughts, it'll help your health, it'll help your appearance. Negative thoughts hurt your health. They cause those wrinkles. And we have an obligation to live and help live, because the creation radiates love. So we're designed to radiate love, not sappy romantic love, but a love that helps all plants, all flora, all fauna. Billy has a great book. It's called The Goblet of Truth, and it has a paragraph which states, "What the truth knows to say." What you're hearing today is what the truth knows to say. And it goes on and it says that rivers, stones, plants, lakes, streams, animals, plants, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form. And these spirit forms, they're on a journey through time which involve many, many lifetimes. And that death is just the passage into the spiritual world. And eventually you'll have rebirth. Just like a plant spawns a seed, your spirit form is much like a seed, and it will sprout again in the spring, and a new plant will come from your spirit form. So the fact is that those who follow the creational natural laws and recommendation will get help. If you're magnanimous, the person that is magnanimous is very generous, he's forgiving, especially toward a rival or someone less powerful than oneself. A person that is magnanimous is also said to be generous in forgiving an insult and injury, free from petty resentfulness or vindictiveness. And if we're magnanimous, somehow the creational natural laws seem to help. Well, you're kind of thinking like creation itself. I don't know if the word thinking really applies to the mental processes of creation. But the creation, the universal consciousness, is neutral positive. It's neither good nor evil. It's balance between the two. So it doesn't correspond to our religious notion of God. The creation is never angry, never jealous, never bitter. It's all about evolution. And that's the purpose of our life, is to evolve through 7 steps. There are 7 steps that human societies go through. There are millions of human societies in our Milky Way galaxy. I believe there are 7 million solar systems in our Milky Way galaxy that support higher life. So we're not alone by any means, and human is the norm in our galaxy. You see, nature works by repeating patterns. So at the cellular level, we have the DNA, the swirling arms of the DNA, and we have the spiraling arms of our galaxy. So nature repeats in these beautiful patterns. And beauty comes from nature in repetitive patterns. And so the person that grows spiritually, his entire sense should be magnanimous. And beauty expresses itself in a plain life full of spiritual dignity. And we should have an inner stillness that brings the beauty that no artist can paint and no poet could literally describe. Now, Billy's spirit form has been all up through these 7 evolutionary steps. They start out in primitive, move to rational life, which is what we're here on the earth. 3rd stage is intelligent life. 4th stage is called real life. And in real life, these extraterrestrial societies learn how to bridge the great gap between the star systems, and they jump from star to star with almost no time passing. They also become incredible biological engineers. And for example, Semyasa's ship had a biological central computer that was sentient. So you could think of her ship as a living being with a metallic hull. So the abilities of humanity is truly astounding. At the 5th stage, human beings start to become what are called kings of wisdom, or Ishwish. And that's where their material consciousness produces great abilities like telepathy and telekinesis. And then in the 6th stage, we become half spiritual and half physical. And this stage lasts for billions of years, is what I understand. And then finally, we become purely spiritual. And there we go into these levels. For example, one of these levels is called Arahat Atharasata, and it ends at the highest level called the Patali level. And it says here, I should also mention that some of the other information and teaching provided with cooperation of Edward Meyer has come from 2 advanced spirit we forms, they're called, which are beyond time and space, and thus so are their perspectives. This is further reason for the apparent timelessness and similarity of the spiritual teachings over the ages. For instance, the we form known as the Patali has delivered 12 commandments again, and is the highest level of consciousness spirit that you attain before you merge with creation. So our spirit form will merge back with the universal consciousness. So since the purpose of our life is evolution, do not allow yourself to drift around in life like you're on an ocean, but steer the ship of your life to solid ground, take the firm control of the helm, and don't let waves rip the steering wheel away from you. And optimism is important. Optimism causes constancy in life. Do not lose your conviction that things will have a good end. Real optimism is very important in your life. Optimism is hopefulness, and it's confidence about the future. It's confident about a successful outcome of something. Synonyms for optimism include confidence, hopefulness, cheerfulness. Optimism is a mental attitude. It's a worldview. Optimism seems to have an effect on our health, our psychological well-being. Put simply, optimists tend to emerge from difficult circumstances with less distress. See, when you fall into pessimism, your body releases something called cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And cortisol suppresses the immune system. It also does other things like help with metabolism of fat, protein, and carbohydrate. But cortisol is literally an immunosuppressive drug. So if you're letting stress come in, you're also suppressing your own immune system. And studies have shown that when patients undergo surgery, if they're optimistic, they tend to recover better, much better. Optimistic behavior enables a human being to see and acknowledge the clear truth, even in bad situations. Optimistic people are not clowns. They're not comical figures. Rather, they are a human being who, under the greatest pressure, remains consciously hopeful, happy. So focus on optimism, not unrealistic optimism, not unrealistic positive thinking. There's a lot of that. And not belief either. Now, belief has a very strong hypnotic effect. It can lead to illogic and fanaticism. What is belief? When you have belief, you're confident in truth, which you cannot prove through any kind of proof. And belief has a hypnotic effect that will shut down deductive reasoning. What is deductive reasoning? An example of deductive reason is that all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. If A, then B. You need to learn this kind of valid reasoning. It comes up in philosophy, mathematics, computer science. If A, then B. It will help you to learn deductive reasoning. Now, alienation, sometimes the religions can alienate us from the facts of life. And the Meyer material is very negative on religion, in the sense that it explains that much of religion today are things based on misunderstanding. One of the things I tend to talk about as of recent is my studies regarding Emmanuel. Now, the Meyer material says the Christ figure was never called Jesus, that his name was Emmanuel. And my own personal studies have revealed that the letter J is the youngest letter in our alphabet. There was no letter J in any language on earth before about 1550. Not in Hebrew, not in Greek, not in Aramaic, not in German, not in English, not in French. The letter J was inserted later after the initial publishing of the Gutenberg Bible and after the 1611 version of the King James. So they went in and arbitrarily changed the names of books. For example, there was no book of Job. It was the book of IOB. The Christ figure was not originally called Jesus. There was no J. The Apostle John was called Yohanan or something to that effect. Elijah was Eliah. Anyway, I have a clip here on the letter J. It kind of reveals what has happened to our consciousness. You see, we reside in a consciousness-conditioned tyranny that's designed to take away the power of your thoughts and get you to submissively conform to a scientific dictatorship.
J is the youngest letter of the alphabet. The letter J is roughly 500 years old and was not part of the ancient Greek, Hebrew, or Latin alphabets. By way of contrast, the ampersand, a combination of the letters E and T, is 2,000 years old. The oldest letter is O, which has been with us for 3,000 years. J descended figuratively and literally from the letter I and was used to give a consonant sound to the letter I. Consider how the letter A sounds differently depending on the word it is used in. Baby or bath, for instance. At one time, I might have been used to sound both like I or like J. Important political and religious figures whose names started with the letter I lived before the invention of the letter J, and today their names are commonly spelled with a J rather than with an I. Julius Caesar was born in approximately 100 BC, and Jesus Christ was born in approximately 5 BC. Some scholars believe that names that began with I were pronounced as if they began with Y, and pronunciations evolved over time. To some people, there are religious implications in the spelling of religious names. Of course, there are no recordings from these time periods, and scholars must rely on ancient texts for guidance. Any books written before 1600 had no J's as we know them. In 1455, Johannes Gutenberg invented movable type, which some consider humankind's greatest invention. Gutenberg's first name likely started with I because he was born before J's were used. Copies of the Gutenberg Bible still exist, and in it Job, for instance, was spelled I-O-B. Similarly, the 1611 edition of the King James Bible had no J's, but 1769 editions of the King James Bible had J's. Some credit Italian playwright and scholar Gian Giorgio Cicino, who was born in 1478, for the official split of I from J. Cicino wrote that the consonant J should be a distinct letter from the vowel I. Similarly, Cicino wrote that the vowel U should be separate from the consonant V. Both ideas grew in popularity, and thus we have J's and U's.
Anyway, that's a concept that I've been talking about recently. I have another clip I haven't listened to in a while. It's a description about where the name Jesus came from, and this is from the perspective of a Christian who's aware of the fact that there was no letter J's before about 1500.
Well, that's a really good question. Where does the name Jesus come from? Well, the name Jesus, most people think that Jesus comes out of the Greek translation of the Bible. And a lot of people think that was his name, the Savior's name. But in reality, Jesus' real name was Yeshua. We have to remember that Jesus was a Jew, he was a Hebrew, and he spoke Hebrew. He was not walking around speaking Greek. I think we have to remember as Christians that Greek is the language of pagans. This is a language of idol worshippers. It's the language of the mythological gods. Hebrew is called the holy tongue, the holy language. And so you can imagine if an invading force came into to America and said they're going to force everybody to speak a different language, we would all fight to hold on to our native tongue. Well, the language of the Greeks in the mind of a Hebrew was an unholy and an unclean thing. But
anyway, that particular clip goes on to explain more about the transliteration. Some argue that there was a transliteration done, not a translation. When you can't do a translation, you do a transliteration, which is you take the words in one or the letters in one language and can try to convert them to a corresponding letter in another language. So it kind of went, some argue, from Yeshua to Iesous to Iesus. And then eventually, when the J was introduced, we kind of turned it into Jesus. I have another clip here on the same topic. Let me see how this one goes.
So where did we get the name Jesus? The name of Jesus has been popularized the world over. It has been called the only name by which one can be saved. And it is a name that has come into existence only in the last 500 years. So what is the name Jesus? The name Jesus is a transliteration. To transliterate means to replace the letters or characters of a word with corresponding letters in another alphabet. Words may be transliterated into the Roman alphabet from their originals in Greek, Chinese, Japanese, and so on. The result is a transliteration, which preserves the form of the original as distinct from a translation, which gives the equivalent word, often unrelated in form, in another language. For example, pteron is a transliteration from Greek, and wing is its translation.
Anyway, that's a little bit of information on the distinction between the transliteration and the translation. The Meyer material says that the person that we call Jesus today was, during the time of his life, called Emmanuel. It's been the part of the Meyer material that I've always been the most skeptical of, but some of my recent studies have kind of supported this to very much a degree. So I don't know if you're interested or know of the whole story of Emmanuel. Supposedly, according to my information, the Talmud of Emmanuel was discovered, I believe, in the early 60s or late 50s by Edward Albert Meyer and Isa Rashid, a Greek Orthodox priest who eventually translated a good portion of the Talmud of Emmanuel into German, which Billy has kind of over the years clarified things and corrected the translation. There's a new translation of the Talmud of Emmanuel coming out. Some scholars like Dr. Jim Deardorff has said that the Talmud of Emmanuel was most likely what they call the Q document, or the source document for the book of Matthew, which others say all of the Gospels are associated or dependent or built on top of the Gospel of Matthew. So anyway, the Talmud of Emmanuel is very controversial. It was destroyed in a fire by the Mossad, and Isa Rashid and his family were gunned down by the Mossad for bringing this information out. It's like I explain that we are living in a consciousness conditioned tyranny. This is a tyranny that's designed to control your consciousness, your awareness, to keep your awareness within a tiny, small box so you can be controlled. Religion is one of the things that the global elite have used over the years to keep people in this tiny, controlled box of thinking. If they can control your thinking, controlling your behavior becomes a much smaller problem. We live in what the Meyer material calls the third millennium. And it's a time when confusion and maliciousness has spread throughout the whole world. And Billy was told about the coming confusion and maliciousness way back when he was a young boy when Spoth told him about the atomic bombs that would be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Well, out of our ruling classes are coming a dark order. And this dark order is controlling our thoughts. It's controlling the mass media. It's trying to bring in a scientific dictatorship. And this scientific dictatorship, some call transhumanism. The Meyer information says in Contact, I think it's 251, it talks about that in future times, people will have their arms and legs removed to be attached to machines. This will become what's called the robotic peoples. Well, there's a scientific dictatorship that's coming into power in the world right now. And our leaders are becoming megalomaniacal. They try to control our thoughts. They try to control our free will. And the people are becoming indolent and obtuse, dumbed down, and indifferent. And this is setting the stage for the rise of transhumanism, where people will accept the control of their consciousness through robotic implants. And the global elite are trying to bring in this transhumanism. And there's kind of a real distorted insanity, a delusional insanity that's associated with transhumanism. Let me play a clip on this, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. Because the transhumanism people are trying to become gods. And this is their big goal.
You know, when I became president in January of 1993, back in the dark ages, the average cell phone weighed 5 pounds. And there were 50 sites on the entire World Wide Web. 50. There have been more added than that since I've been talking.
God made man in his own image. God intended for man to become one with God. We are going to become one with God. Cloning and the reprogramming of DNA is the first serious step in becoming one with God.
This issue is going to dominate our global politics. This is the issue that will color the century as we merge with machines, and I think it's inevitable that we will. We will transform into something new. Evolution.
Okay, the transhumanists are trying to merge with machines. I think it's a scam, personally, just to make you more controllable. What does Billy say about the Dark Order? However, all the items named here only represent the start, because in secret there is a mighty organization of the governing class and mightful ones, as well as many of their obedient lackeys that are emerging from your humanity, who are creating a secret order of darkness with their own evil laws and ordinances, who are bent on hatred for the poor and weak and against the economically imprisoned and all normal citizens. And it is their desire to seize ever more might, more money, and entire mastery over the whole earth. And your humanity, these people are spreading their evil supremacy over the world and are supported by these obedient vassals of all kinds. So this is the challenge here in the third millennium. As our leaders become more and more megalomaniacal, we're going to see many things which are going to seem strange to us. And we're going to see all sorts of problems. For example, one of the things that's really going to rear its ugly head in the third millennium is overpopulation. And overpopulation has certain side effects, like the scarcity of fresh water. So let's listen to this clip that talks about fresh water and its scarcity.
You might have heard that we're running out of fresh water. This might sound strange to you because if you live in a place where water flows freely from the tap or shower at any time, it sure doesn't seem like a big deal. It's just there, right? Wrong. The only obvious thing about fresh water is how much we need it. Because it's essential to life, we need to think about it carefully. Right now, at this very moment, some people, women and girls in particular, walk hours and miles per day to get fresh water. And even then, it may not be clean. Every 15 seconds, a child dies due to waterborne diseases. This is tragic. The most compelling reasons to think about fresh water therefore have to do with what we might call the global common good. This is not something we normally think about, but it means recognizing how much fresh water matters for the flourishing of human and non-human life on Earth, now and in the future. How do we think about something as local as our faucets and as global as fresh water? Is there a connection between them? Many people assume that fresh water shortages are due to individual wastefulness, running the water while you brush your teeth, for example, or taking really long showers.
Some of the problem with fresh water comes because of massive populations in certain areas of the earth, like in Bangladesh, where they have 146 million people living in an area the size of Iowa. Let's listen about Bangladesh's population problem.
Next, today is World Water Day. Tonight, we look at an innovative approach to getting clean water to slum dwellers in so-called megacities. Our story is another in our occasional reports about population issues around the globe. It's part of a collaboration with National Geographic magazine and the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, and comes from special correspondent Steve Sapienza in Bangladesh.
Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, is one of the world's fastest-growing cities and one of the poorest. As in many other developing countries, people are leaving the countryside in search of work and a better life in the city. Dhaka's population, now estimated at 15 million, is expected to hit 20 million by 2025.
Dhaka is one of the megacities which is growing too fast.
Country Director for the charity WaterAid, Dr. Khairul Islam, says the increased population density is severely taxing the city's ability to house and care for its people.
Almost 5,000 slums are in and around Dhaka city, and almost one-third of the population are living in either low-income communities and slum areas. Most of them don't have ownership over those pieces of land that they're residing. But the main challenge is provisioning essential services for this huge number of population, mainly water and sanitation.
With 2,000 newcomers.
I have another clip here that talks about the global water crisis.
Today, according to UNICEF, at least 2.6 billion people lack adequate sanitation, while 1.1 billion people live without clean drinking water, period. Water is the key component in all of our daily lives, no matter where we live. Not only for human use, but for energy, industry, agriculture, and livestock. Now, if you look at the Earth, you will notice that over 75% of our blue planet is water. The problem is, only 3% of that water is fresh water.
So only 3% of our massive amount of water is fresh water. That's one of the reasons why our aquifers are getting depleted. Anyway, these are various topics. We're going to have to harness the power of our thinking to start to solve some of these problems that we've created for ourselves. Hope you've enjoyed the show. My name is Mark Snyder. This is Ohio Exopolitics, and we'll be back in the very near future. Have a good day.